Hey, thank you, Chuck. Great to see everyone here. I'm very excited to introduce my friends Ada Briceño and Mark Dudzik. It's really extraordinary to have such prominent and strategically smart labor leaders engaged in our work to win single-payer healthcare, and to have them in conversation tonight. Ada Briceño has dedicated her career to uplifting marginal voices and bridging communities. And in addition to union organizing and political work, she has led many civil rights, immigrant rights, women's rights, and environmental efforts. She was named one of Orange County's 100 most influential by Orange County Register for 2020, 2019, 2018, and 2014. She immigrated to the United States at age 6 when Ada's family fled the civil war in Nicaragua. Today she serves as co-president of Unite Here Local 11, representing over 32,000 hotel workers in Los Angeles County, Orange County, and Arizona. And for those of you watching and participating in the 2022 midterms in Arizona, her work there was instrumental, not only in Senator Kelly's reelection, but in the other victories for Democrats and progressives in Arizona. She is a Democratic National Committee member and chairwoman of the Democratic Party of Orange County. My dear friend Mark Dudzik is, as Chuck said, soon to be retired from his position as national coordinator for the labor campaign for single payer, which advocates for single-payer healthcare, and has done extraordinary work moving the AFL-CIO to official positions in support of Medicare for All, and bringing together a diverse set of unions and labor activists in our movement to support that demand in Congress and in the streets. He is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He was the national organizer and chairman of the United States Labor Party, and a longtime labor activist. For 18 years before becoming Labor Party chairman, Dudzik was president of Local 8149 OCAL, a branch of the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers International Union, which, as many of you know, was one of the most important unions to the contemporary movement for single-payer healthcare. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark and Ada. I believe, Ada, you're going first. And welcome. It is so great to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here with so many of you. And I want to take first a moment to thank One Payer State for all your work to make sure that we're uplifting Medicare for all, or single payer. I want to thank every single person here for your efforts for such a long time. I'd like to actually ask Mark if it's okay to do this together, if you don't mind. We're such a good team, and I want to tell you that I found my voice and in speaking about single payer with Mark. Mark, I remember a few years ago, tapped me to speak about our union's position on Medicare for all, and between him and another person locally, I really, felt like I had something to say about this issue. So he's been a great mentor in this work for me. So thank you, Mark, for being here and for dragging me along to make sure that that we keep uplifting this. So if you don't mind, we wanted to do an interactive presentation to all of you. So Mark, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, well, thank you, Ada. And my name is Mark Dudzik. I think I've been pretty well introduced by Michael Lighty. I think I'm more of a fellow traveler to DSA. I don't recall I ever paying any dues to them, but I don't know where that rumor started, but I certainly, I'm in that big tent there. So Ada, I remember exactly when I met you. It was in the run up to the 2020 presidential primaries, when some candidates were trashing unions or claiming that unions were opposed to Medicare for all, and that they shouldn't support any candidate who supports Medicare for all because it would undermine their benefit programs. And Ada, you bravely called bullshit on that in a very a difficult position within the labor movement. You know, it's very hard for unions to publicly disagree with each other. And we were, you know, really, we knew that union members, in fact, support single payer when they, you know, when they're confronted with the facts. And in fact, the outcome of the Nevada primaries in 2020 kind of bore that out. But, you know, it's very difficult for union leaders to speak up sometimes. And, you know, Ada was just fearless and really just so well spoken on this. And so, Ada, where did you get that courage to speak out? And why did you think it was so important to speak out in 2020?
You know, I know we were previously introduced, but I'll say a couple of things, speaking of courage, because, you know, I think, you know, something happened in our background, in all of us, that gave us the courage to be activists, to be leaders, to stand up for the right thing. And for me, it was not having a voice. And I came to this country at a very young age, as you heard, and I struggled with acclimation. I struggled with language. I struggled with, you know, lack of finances. And as a result, I went into the workforce really early. And I wasn't really great at school, and that really took a bit of, you know, difficulty on my self-esteem. But when I finally got a union job is really where I felt, you know, my activism coming to fruition. And I got a job at a union hotel, where I was working there as a front desk clerk, where I made $2 more an hour back in the 90s. I got my first pair of glasses, and my best meal of the day was at the hotel. But most importantly, I found a voice there, and I was able to stand up for myself through my collective bargaining agreement. And then if that wasn't enough, I learned how to stand up for my coworkers, the dishwashers and cooks that worked alongside me. And in a very short period of time, I became the leader of the workers of that hotel. And then I learned something even better, that I can give them the tools to stand up for themselves and find the leadership within themselves to give their families a better livelihood. And I really feel like, you know, standing up for our workers has what, you know, is what often gives, you know, the leaders the courage to make bold moves despite, you know, despite the tribulations that might come with that, because you've got to say what's right. So, you know, I entered, you know, a year after that, I started working at the union office, and for the next 8 years, I held every position in the union. And I finally decided that I needed to run for the top office of my union, because I wanted workers to be empowered and have a voice on the job and fight for themselves. And so I became the top leader of the union, really started, you know, along with a whole bunch of experienced organizers, teaching them how to stand up and giving them the tools. And what was magnificent is that when you teach someone how to stand up to the boss, it doesn't only stay there. You can't just learn how to stand up for yourself in one area of your life, but really you learn how to stand up in many areas. So they became involved in city council, they became involved in their PTAs, and they became more entrenched in their communities. And, you know, we found ourselves going to the bargaining table and demanding better wages, pensions, and working conditions. But frankly, what we encountered is that, you know, we were in the fights of our lives just to keep the healthcare insurance that, you know, that ourselves and our families needed. And even though I have said that I've embarked, you know, in social justice and, you know, bringing up workers, there was a time in my life that I felt like I don't know how many hours, it feels like I work for the, you know, insurance industry, because I spent all my time bargaining to get them more money instead of putting it into the wages of our workers, into the pension of our workers. And frankly, you know, I understand the concept of protecting our healthcare, but I don't understand and I don't accept that it behind, right? So while we have fought for this prized benefit, right, we also need to take that off of the bargaining table so we can, increase our wages, so we can get childcare, so we can get all those things that will put our members into the middle class. And so I'm a little bitter that I worked so hard to get them so much money. And frankly, Mark, that's where my courage comes from. The endless hours fighting to get the insurance company. We need to collect checks from Kaiser and everybody else for all that time we put in to bargain on behalf of and get them more money. And so when the discourse was occurring in our nation about whether or not unions believe that, well, I know a whole bunch of, feisty room attendants and dishwashers who rather, put their money into other things than keep this healthcare, situation. And for us to keep at the will of the employer, because of our healthcare. It's really stifles the way that we try to organize and grow our union because everybody's concerned. It keeps people who are innovative and thoughtful. And I don't need to tell you this, but I know so many cooks who can open their own businesses, who are so talented, but yet they're stuck, in the hotel, in that little restaurant in the hotel where, they're having a hard time making ends meet because of the cost of healthcare. They're stuck there, right? So I see so many things that have prohibited our people from moving forward, and we need a system change. And that's why I'm here with Mark to tell you my story about, why we believe Medicare for All is so crucial, and also the difficulty of organizing, other unions to believe the same thing that, that Mark and I and all of you believe in.
Well, that's a really powerful story, Ada. And, the more folks coming out of the union movement that we talk to, the more stories we hear like that, especially people like you who are in the trenches fighting to represent your members and fighting for your members. And this idea that employment should be linked to healthcare is it's just such an absurd idea. We're the only country in the world that does that, so that you lose your job, you lose your healthcare, your employer has the ability to decide what kind of healthcare you get from year to year. And if you're in a union, which only 10% of us are in, maybe you can negotiate with your employer on it. But why should your boss decide? As a Teamster leader in Philadelphia has told me once, why should the boss decide whether we live or die? This should be a right that we have as workers. So this is just a really powerful understanding based on our experiences trying to fight and represent for workers. But nonetheless, Ada, as a lot of unions are still on the fence about whether they support Medicare for all. And there be some openly resist it. Others say, well, it's a good idea. We support it in principle, but we're not going to put any effort into it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that despite all of the evidence, that it's driving wage stagnation, that it's unsustainable, you can't continue to negotiate these numbers? If anybody who negotiates contracts, when you're talking about a coverage that costs, for a family of four, upwards of $25,000 a year in some markets, and it goes up twice as fast as inflation year after year, it's unsustainable. But why do people in the labor movement still hold to the employment-based model in many cases? Have you thought about that?
I have, Mark, and I'd like you to join me, because I know you have also spoken to folks around the country and have a deep understanding of that. I'll say the few things that I know, and I'd like to hear from you, if there are different things. So number one is fear. I think people are fearful of taking on such a huge fight, right? And maybe they don't feel like it's their place to lead in it, which is very difficult because I gotta say, you just heard Mark say that we're a very small portion of Americans have unions. And I feel like, we are under the gun to ensure that we that we turn that around. And we're not going to turn it around if we keep the same structures, right? So number one is fear. Number two is, look, my union maybe has had 4 or 5 trust funds. We're a culmination of 3 different mergers. In some small locals, right? We had a couple of funds. And so, there are, we're trustees on those funds. But we also, in addition to that, there are conferences and things people go to. And so they get attached, in my opinion, to those positions and to those, decisions that are made. They want to be able to have and pick, what insurance they go to, what are the benefits, so I think having a say is also a reason, figuring out, will they have a say? And I think that's where we can engage in that conversation, making sure folks have a seat at the table. But, it's just hard to say the one thing. There's just many things, like, because it's happened like that for a long period of time, it must be good. And why do we need to change it? Is, I think, another issue. And the other thing is, like, because we fought so hard for it at the bargaining table, it must mean that we need to keep it within our jurisdiction, right? If not, somebody else is going to mess it up. So, they're comfy with their trustee positions. That might be something they very much like. So they're really not thinking of the whole. They're specifically thinking of their members, but we cannot think of only our members without thinking of all workers across the nation if we're going to continue to exist, right? That's just, as a labor movement, in my opinion, and it stomps us from going out and if we don't have to bargain for healthcare and we take that off the table, can you imagine all our resources instead going into non-union organizing and making sure that we're growing the labor movement? Can you imagine those we would have different requests, right? And the employers wouldn't be using the healthcare against the workers when they're trying to unionize. So that fear that they have will be stripped from them. And it might be just a little bit easier in order to get that done. But Mark, you've been at it for much longer than I have. I just thought, I'm going to keep my head down, do my thing. And then I realized, no, this is insanity. We can't keep doing the things the same. So tell me, Mark, what you found the biggest obstacles for other union leaders to stand up.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, and you kind of talked about it, that there still is a belief that somehow it's a union advantage to have, a healthcare plan, and that you negotiate, that people will appreciate being a member of a union because it fights so hard for their healthcare. And there's some truth to that, in the world where people struggle to get healthcare coverage, unions like Unite Here, your union, Ada, has fought, you maintained healthcare coverage for tens of thousands of workers during the pandemic when you had 95% unemployment in the hospitality industry. And it was a heroic effort, to do that. Now, it sure would have been a hell of a lot easier if everybody had healthcare and you didn't have to worry about that. And maybe you could have spent your effort, making sure people had housing and stuff like that. But, nonetheless, it's part of unions' identity. When unions are under assault, they often kind of cling to those symbols of what it means to be a union member. There was a decision, Supreme Court decision called the Janus decision several years ago, which basically said that public sector unions by law have to represent all the people in their bargaining unit, but that the people who are represented by them no longer have to pay dues to them. So, go figure that. I'd like to pass a law that says, my grocery store has to provide me groceries, but I don't have to pay at checkout, but they never passed that law. But, so a lot of public sector unions were like, well, we've got to, emphasize that the union provides you health care, and we don't want to, move that out of the union purview. So, there's those kind of tensions that play out. But, I got to say, I mean, when I first joined the labor movement in the 1970s, every contract, we were like, okay, what are we going to get? We're going to get more. We're going to get like, we're going to get orthodontia on the dental coverage, or we're going to be able to get 2 pair of glasses a year instead of 1 pair of glasses. So every year we got a little bit extra. But by the 1980s, that turned around, and it was every contract we had to give something back. We had to raise a deductible or agree to a new limited network on our health plan, or have a 2-tier system, and people had to wait longer, and all of these givebacks. And it got to the point when the last few contracts I negotiated before I moved down to DC to work on issues like this, people would whisper in your ear as you get ready for negotiations, whatever you do, don't give up the healthcare benefit. I don't care if we don't get a raise for 3 years. I don't care if we don't get any more vacation time. You got to hold on to the healthcare. And so, we started bargaining against ourselves, because, if I knew that, the boss also knew that at the bargaining table. And I'm sure you've experienced that, that the number one issue for your members was their healthcare, and they could dangle that in front of you and win all kinds of concessions and retractions on other issues. And so it's become, what was once our most cherished benefit has really become an anchor around the neck of the working class. So unions, maybe are slow to realize that. And one of the other reasons that they are slow to realize it is often because of the political relationships that they maintain with political leaders who are not supporting Medicare for all, or who are opposed to Medicare for all. And unions are multi-issue organizations. They depend and rely on those relationships. And they may be reluctant to break with those political leaders around Medicare for all when they need them to support the minimum wage legislation, or labor law reform, or disability benefits, or whatever is their number one issue. And I know that, in another world, you are also a strong leader of the Democratic Party in Orange County. And so I wonder how you think those two relationships kind of interact.
Yeah, Mark, they do interact because I'm very vocal on it. And I'm very vocal on it. And I talk to our Congress folks about how I feel about them. We have a good relationship. And while not all of them are where we need them to be, I feel like relationship, really, and power really gets them, to a better place. So it is difficult. This particular situation is difficult. Obviously not, we haven't been able to get there. I also have to say that I agree, Mark, that all those things that you touched on are reasons why maybe we see the labor movement struggle, or some of the labor movement struggle around Medicare for all. But the truth is that we have so much to offer, as, the labor movement. I've seen studies that show that the labor movement is tied to democracy, and with the decline of the labor movement, so is the decline of democracy as well. There's so much that we can sell our members on, having a voice on the job. I just told you that when I joined the union, it gave me, it gave me a profound sense of being, that I found my passion, right? That I had a voice, and that had more meaning than frankly any other. While every other benefit was super important, what was the most important is that I had a voice, right? Just like for women, just as our right to have an abortion, right? You may decide to use it or not, but just knowing that you have that right is crucial. And that's labor for you. If you have a voice on the job, it's harder, it's harder for you to get sexual harassed. It's, easier for you to come together with your colleagues and fix an issue that's happening in your workplace. But I think that since, it's been, since we've had such a hard time in the labor movement, all these laws are against us, and we're constantly fighting the, mighty boss. We have focused on just uplifting that healthcare and then leaving all the other benefits behind. And so what we've done in our membership is we've told our members that while the reason why we have the healthcare is because of their power, right? And show them that if we had a system that would make sure that took care of everyone, then every single worker would be uplifted. So they get it, and they're like, okay, I don't need to have control of my healthcare. I trust that if there's a system that takes care of all of us, we're all collectively going to be better, right? And we talk about how other nations are very successful at it. But I think in Orange County, one of the things that we try to do is talk a lot about Medicare for all, do actions around and get involved as much as we can on it, and talk to our legislators. That's what we can do to move the needle. The more that we're talking about it and organizing folks around it, the easier it's going to be. And in California, we've had a whole bunch of discussion, right, Michael, around Medicare for all, and we're going to continue to have those discussions. I think every time, we come out of one of those, whether we win, even if we lose, we are uplifting that fight for the next time. And that's what being in a struggle is all about. You don't necessarily win the first time, but you keep lifting the movement up and building towards it and grabbing a few more votes as you go. So I don't know if that answered, Mark, your question.
Yeah, no, that was great, Ada. You mentioned the right to abortion in your answer, and I know you're very passionate about that. So why do you think that reproductive rights are a workers' issue, and how do you think having a Medicare for all system would make it easier for women to guarantee their rights to access to abortion and other reproductive services?
Well, at Unite Here, Local 11, the majority of our members are women. And so if a woman cannot choose what to do with their bodies, it is definitely a work problem. Whether or not they're able to get the attention they need is directly involved with whether or not they can go to work. I think that's really, really important. And then also, we know that if we had single payer, it would significantly improve the reproductive health of all women by mandating that coverage. Obviously we've got to fight for it, but not only for reproductive care, but also for all LGBTQ care. And so it would take that financial burden of preventative care and also cover forms of contraception. And those two things are tied together for us, right? We think it's really important for someone not to have the burden of having to go through a pregnancy if they can't go through it. So I think it's very, very much a part of this conversation, and I want to brainstorm with you about how we tie that conversation together more and more. And that's what I've been talking to Mark about. Like, let's tie the conversation. We know that we need the labor movement. Medicare for all, single payer needs the labor movement in order to move the needle on this issue. And that's why I know that, folks have the question, how do we get the labor movement, more involved? Because it's, the labor movement has been, instrumental in the past, but we need the women's movement. We need the labor movement. We need the Medicare for all movement if we're going to pass and really change where we're going in our country on this issue.
So Otto, I think one more thing I'd like to discuss briefly before we open it up for questions. One of the things that Labor for Single Payer has always said in terms of what our mission is to move labor in is because labor is the one institution in this society that at its best is constructed to fight, masses of corporate power. That's what it does. It fights power. That's what prevents Americans from achieving the right to health care in this country is the concentrated power of the medical industrial complex. So if we need to fight that kind of power, labor has to be in the fight. And the reason that labor can do that is because it has still, in even its weakened state, still has the organizing capacity and the organizing expertise to do so. And Local 11, your local, has distinguished itself in a member mobilization model that has put hundreds of your members on the street talking one-on-one in political constituencies about, the key issues of democracy. I have to say, you've been a little modest about it, but, I think that the work that your local did, without that work, Trump would still be president in this country. I think the work you did in the 2020 election cycle when, everybody else, said we can't do one-on-one dialogues with voters. We can't go out there and engage with voters. It's too dangerous. We're going to have to use Facebook and YouTube. And you all said, you know what? If we can freaking figure out how to serve drinks to people in casinos, we can figure out how to talk to voters one-on-one. And you trained and mobilized hundreds of people. And, I just would like to maybe you tell folks, how you were able to do that and to continue that in your union and, and how that might be a model for how we can win people over to the fight for Medicare for all.
Thank you, Mark. I actually had an interview with my colleagues this morning with the New Yorker with the same exact question. So I'm pretty prepped for it. So look, this is really a culmination of a long period of time that our union has been developing our troops, however you want to talk about, how we did that. But in 2020, when folks could not go out and knock on doors, we had a long-term commitment. We were going to be on the ground. We had merged, the Los Angeles portion of the union with Arizona to take over Arizona. And so we had a group of people who came together with other organizations, and we were all supposed to be at the doors. And everybody was backing down. And what we did, our members were out of work. They couldn't work because our industry was down. And instead, what we did is that we sent all these people from Orange County and Los Angeles, about over 300 folks, into Arizona. And so they weren't working. We found money from other unions to help pay. We hired an epidemiologist. We worked their schedule from day to night to ensure that nobody got infected. This was prior to to any of the vaccines, of course. And we knocked on over 800,000 doors. And we didn't knock on the door and run away and hope that nobody would answer the door. But what we did is the same thing we do in the workplace. And that is build relationships and speak to people with our hearts and our stories and change the hearts and minds of folks. And that's how we build camaraderie, and we build a very strong sense of belonging inside the workplace. And we took that into the streets and into those doors, right? And not only did we knock loudly and proudly, but if they weren't by the door, we went to the window and figured out if we can get them. And we spoke to them for a nice period of time about why we were at those doors, right? I mean, just remember, nobody was at the door, but frankly, probably the safest place to be was outside of somebody's, in the fresh air. So we were successful then. And as a result of that, we were asked to go to Georgia right after that. So our members then left their families for the holiday season and went to Georgia to help win those 2 Senate seats. And we replicated that in 2022, again in Arizona, where we did it also in the streets of Los Angeles and the streets of Anaheim while we did Arizona. And so we knocked on over 2 million doors. And by that time, we had already built a good rapport of our work. So we were able to get a whole bunch more money in order to pay our staff. And every single contract that we have has provisions in there that the boss, if the union wants, Joe from housekeeping to come out on leave, they've got to, they let them come to be trained at the union, and they go back to the workplace. So we have it all figured out where we can train a good group of people and then put them back on the job, and then take out another group of people, train them and put them back on the job. That way, when we have election seasons, we have hundreds of people who are ready to come out and knock on those doors and help move democracy forward. So we're committed to that, but we also have expectations, right? Like, we're doing this, frankly, many, I saw in the chat that many of you are part of the, labor movement as well. You've been a union member, you know how many grievances there are, you know how many contracts go. It's not that we were lacking that and we decided to go, help save democracy. It's that we put that on hold to ensure that we help save democracy. But we want to have a seat at the table. We want workers to have a seat at the table. We want low-wage folks. We want immigrants to have a seat at the table. And that's why we're really going out of our comfort zone and working really hard. And one of our talking points is Medicare for all. So we're hoping to affect change with single payer by knocking on those doors, by getting uncomfortable, by helping win these elections across, across our country. So yeah, Mark, that is by far, the thing that I feel most proud of our members doing. And they get it. They get how it's tied. They couldn't see themselves being in a space where of where we were heading with Trump, right? They needed to be part of helping save that democracy. So yeah, that's really great work. But we also want some recognition as far as single payer.
All right, I guess we're gonna have to move to the questions section, but I just want to point out that your sister locals did similar work in Nevada and Pennsylvania, so you might want to thank a union member that we're not currently living under fascism. I just want to also recognize, Ada serves on the steering committee of the Labor Campaign for Single Payer, as does Michael Lighty, who represents another great fighting union in this area, in the NUHW, National Union of Healthcare Workers. And I think we've been joined also on this meeting with Rose Roach, who is the incoming national coordinator of the Labor Campaign for Single Payer. We're very excited to have Rose, who has just led the Minnesota nurses through one of the largest strikes largest nursing strikes in U.S. history, and made huge advances for the nurses in Minnesota. And that union is also a leading light in fighting for the state single payer in Minnesota and national single payer. So Chuck, how do we want to do the questions? Are you going to curate them?
Yeah, I was working with Betty Keller. Betty, are you able to come up? Are there questions that you can bring forward? In the meantime, I see Robbie Stern has his hand up, our good friend up in Washington State with Basara, the Puget Sound advocates for retirement action, longtime unionite. Robbie, quick question for Ada and our
Yeah, real quick question. You all know that we're dealing with a huge privatization of Medicare. And also, unfortunately, we have the AFL-CIO and a number of unions now partnering with insurance companies to put their people in Medicare Advantage plans. Would you comment on how you think that's going to impact the Medicare for All movement?
Ada, you want me to speak to that? And
If you would, that would be great, Mark.
you can maybe if add anything. Yeah, Robbie, a number of unions have moved their members into Medicare Advantage programs, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes maybe out of stupidity, and sometimes out of cupidity. I'll start with the cupidity first. Some unions are members of different programs that are sort of the general rubric is called union privilege programs, which they partner with vendors who sell services to union members, and they get a bit of the cut from the sales. So for example, I have an AT&T phone that is a union privilege phone, so I get a little cheaper rate. And when I pay my phone bill, the AFL-CIO or the Steelworkers Union gets a little bit of the money that goes to AT&T. And in that circumstance, I don't mind, having the steelworkers get a little more money than AT&T does. But when it comes to healthcare, they become shills sometimes for substandard and inadequate coverage, and that does happen, and they engage in that. And then stupidity. Often you look at these privatized plans, the Medicare Advantage plans. And in many ways, they mimic the kinds of benefits that workers had when they were employed. And they, like many other people, those of us, who listen to Joe Namath on late night television, we get sold a bill of goods in terms of how comprehensive these benefits are and how cost effective they are. And, they think they're getting a good deal until they find out that, when you really need the benefits, they're often not there, or you have to jump through very many hoops. And then finally, really honestly, out of necessity, sometimes, it's the best of a bunch of bad choices that unions have. If you're not able to negotiate an adequate amount of coverage from your employer, or your employer goes bankrupt, like, the auto industry did in 2009, and basically said, to the UAW, here's a pot of money, make it last as long as you can. We're getting out of the healthcare business for retirees. Sometimes you have to make some, like, anybody else in the system of privatized healthcare, you have to make some bad choices. But, whatever drove unions into that, again, ultimately, every new customer for Medicare Advantage is undermining the public Medicare system, and is undermining our future of having Medicare for all, because we're creating more and more profiteering, in what should be a public program, and it makes it much harder for us to extract everybody out of it. So, we've got to deal with that issue, as a number one priority. The privatization has really reached crisis portions. And there's this attempt that started under Trump, and has continued to some degree under the Biden administration to further privatize it through another program called ACO REACH. So we've got to come up with that, but we've got to do it in a way, I think, that respectfully engages with both the institutions and the individuals who may have chosen these insurance coverages, because it's the best of, a series of bad choices. And we don't need to denounce or condemn people for their personal choices, but we do need to find a way out of this morass. And I don't know, Ada, if you have anything to add to that, or whether we should just move on, for the sake of time.
Let's move on.
Thanks so much for that, Mark. And I do see Bill and Peter's hands up, but let's jump in with a couple of things I got in the chat here. There are some folks here in this meeting tonight who are new or relatively new to single payer. So we're speaking from the assumption that everybody knows what single payer is. Can you give just a tiny thumbnail description of what single payer is and how it works, just very briefly? And I'll drop a link into the chat where you can, it's a 60-minute documentary I made several years ago. It's called Fix It Healthcare. It's a Fix It Healthcare at the Turning Point. That should be a good primer for people. But can Ada, Mark, just explain simple what a single payer is?
Mark, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's
Or-
basically, we collect all of the money that we need to pay for everybody's healthcare through a progressive public financing system. We determine, the level and the standards of healthcare, and everybody has access to the same level of healthcare. And then, people and their doctors are free to choose whatever providers that they feel that they need to have. And those providers are compensated in a equitable and fair way. So it is a system that functions like an expanded and improved version of the Medicare system that was set up in this country in the mid-1960s. Everybody in, nobody out, single standard of care for everyone. No break in coverage, and financed by ability to pay, no costs at the point of service.
Thanks for
Anything I
that.
missed, Ada?
No, I don't think so, Mark.
One thing I add to it is it's publicly funded and mostly privately delivered. So it gives you greater choice than you currently have. It's the best of both worlds. Thanks for that, Mark and Ada. Let's see, Bill Farmer. Bill, unmute and quick question.
Well, I'm just wondering if our tactic needs to be amended a bit, because when I hear that 800,000 doors were knocked on, that is a tremendous effort. And that's a union. And with combinations of other progressive unions, we could knock on millions of doors. And then I also hear that the future leader of Labor Campaign for Single Payer just led a nurses' strike, which is an economic strike, and won a lot of benefits. Instead of pouring all of our money and all of our energy into the constant rotating door of democratic electoral politics, and really the consolidation structurally of healthcare that is state government centered more and more, and nationally, federally centered, can't we pick spots to organize people to strike? Perhaps Chicago or
Thanks.
Minneapolis
Yeah.
or Los Angeles. That's my question.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Ada, Mark?
You want to say anything about that, Ada?
I really, you hit a part right for me. I just wanted you to note that in Los Angeles, we have over 100 contracts in the service industry with my union that are expiring, and we are gearing up for a strike in Los Angeles from wages and working conditions and so forth within the system. I don't know. Can we do? I do think that change happens when the masses move forward, but in the state and in the place we're at, can the few unions that are lined up, can we pull that off? I think we have a lot of organizing still to do, but that's my take.
Yeah, I think Ada, you really kind of nailed it there. I mean, I find the idea of a political strike very intriguing. It's not something the U.S. workers are used to doing, and there's a bunch of legal barriers to doing so. But that might be, as we begin to build momentum in this movement, that might be a direction that we want to explore. I mean, French workers right now are in the street defending their rights to retire at a decent age. And, you know, they have a, you know, long history of doing that, going out into the street to defend their access to social benefits and social programs. So, you know, we might take a page from those folks, but, you know, there are, you know, substantial organizing and legal obstacles that we would have to overcome. But, you know, as we build this movement, we're going to try a whole lot of different tactics, I think.
Terrific. I think, Michael Pan, you have a question? I think
Yes,
you're
I
up.
do. Yes, I do have a question. Yes. My question is this. In the chat section, I asked earlier about, I know there are some unions who advocate for Medicare for all. And my question is, how do we engage unions who are for Medicare for all to sway unions who are opposed to Medicare for all regard? Because I understand the unions who are opposed to Medicare for all, they have contracts with their employers regarding like pay, you know, insurance carriers, networks that they're concerned about, that if we're Medicare for all, that the networks will either like restrict their movements or choices uh going forward. And number two is, we need to emphasize the message of Medicare for all to unions. I understand unions, to them that it's about ownership, autonomy, and control. And so how do we move that? Because we know very clearly Democrats, although unions receive support from Democrats, but we know very clearly Democrats are sidestepping unions indirectly by working with big corporations to change labor contracts.
All right, thanks, Michael. Ada, Mark?
Yeah, I could start with this. I think, frankly, folks that are in the labor movement, you know, have got to have conversations, those difficult conversations that are sometimes exhausting with our colleagues, right? I think we also have to look at, you know, changes that are made within leadership as things progress. I also think the more mainstream it becomes, it's also will be easier. You know, I don't know that I have a 100% solution, because frankly, you know, there are all kinds of unions that, you know, may have some interest in, we may align on workers' rights, but we don't align in politics, right? So there's just all kinds of difficulty and intricacies, and while we all try to speak with one voice, it is often impossible, right? So sometimes being bold in that space kind of shuts you out of it, if that makes some sense, to, you know, being different and speaking up about it. Sometimes it doesn't allow for a whole bunch of discussion. So I really do believe that having, you know, the public discourse get louder on this issue is something that will be helpful. Mark?
Yeah, I think you know, pretty much said what I would say. Maybe Chuck, we can move on to, I know it's getting late here, a couple more questions rather than.
So there were a couple of questions in the chat. Did you want me to pull those up for you?
And Robert's hand is up as well.
So which do you want?
Go with the earlier chat questions, or there's something different, and then we'll bring up Robert. Thank you.
Okay, so one of our questions was, does Unite Here have a multi-employer trust? How is it coping with rising healthcare prices?
Well, that's one
do.
for Ada.
Yeah, we do. And like I said, you know, at some point we had 3 or 4 of them. And frankly, we had, you know, and I know you all know this, but let me vent a little. We had 5 bank accounts and 5 consultants and 5, you know, and all those extra costs, you know, that our members don't deserve, right? And so we've done a good job in merging it. But, you know, don't have to pay the extra, you know, banking systems, administrative fees and stuff. We participate with our international, but also we have some local ones as well. And it's difficult. But you know what? We're the fact that our numbers are growing and we're getting a little more clout, and we've been able to win some victories across our jurisdiction. It just means that, you know, we push further, but we're not only pushing for healthcare. We don't care how much healthcare costs. We're pushing through to make sure that we make some changes in our pension and our healthcare. But it is hard. We are seeing high costs, so we are not passing it on to our members. We're fighting the boss for it.
I just want to tell a real quick story about my tribe. My local union had a small trust fund that provided benefits. And when I ran for union president in 1982, part of my program was that we're going to move the trust fund into also covering legal benefits for our members as well as healthcare benefits. And we never were able to do that because every freaking penny that we could squeeze out of the bosses had to go to provide basic healthcare for our members and retirees. So, we could never really use those benefit funds for the kind of, real union plus benefits that would have really strengthened the union, because we had to put every penny into, what every other country, provides as a matter of right for all of their citizens. So, I know Canadian unions also have health and welfare funds that do all kinds of amazing things for their members. And, they don't have to negotiate $25,000 a year for just basic healthcare coverage. So, it'd be and again, it's hard to convince some of these folks in that community, but it really would be a very liberatory moment if these health and welfare funds didn't have to provide basic coverages for their members and retirees.
Thank you so much. Let's have Robert Skinner's question. I have another one from the chat I wanted to get to you. Robert?
All right, thank you for allowing me to be. This is my first time in this meeting, and I live in California, and I'm working with the California Nurses Association. I'm a volunteer, and we're trying to organize for CalCare. And what we're trying to do in my county is we're trying to get like a voters coalition. And of any of you who are in California, if you could get in touch with me after this meeting, I would really appreciate that, because I tend to think that the way to go is to put pressure on the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has basically said it's a right, that we control 60% of the Assembly, 60% of the Senate. Newsom is a Democrat. It's basically an issue of voters versus the donors. And I think that is a way to go. And I'm all with you guys, and I'm hoping that we can somehow do something here, because this is more than just a labor issue. This is an everybody issue. And anyway, I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the other question I want to be sure to pull out is, what about unions who use health insurance and its battles to organize more members? So when they're actually using that as a tool.
You mean that they'll convince their members that they get healthcare coverage? Is that what the question implies?
Lou, do you want to expand?
I think you.
Oh, hey there, Lou.
Before. Hi. It's good to see you, Mark. Yeah, I'm from Oregon. We have unions here that actually, not only does the employer weaponize health insurance, but also the union will even weaponize it. But I think you basically answered that question by saying, we have to convince our union brothers and sisters to take that weapon away from the management and take health insurance off the bargaining table. So I'll pass.
Thanks, Lou. But you know what? I think actually the necessity to bargain for healthcare, negotiate healthcare, makes it harder to organize workers in this country than in other countries around the world, because an employer knows that when you go to the bargaining table, if they win the union, not only are you going to be talking to them about wages and other things, you're going to be talking to them about healthcare. And it's, I was talking to the president of Otta's sister local in the Bay Area, Local 2 Unite here. And, he said, our health plan costs $9,000 a member. And so when a hotel is confronted with an organizing campaign and they do the math and they know that they got to come up with $3 more per hour in wages, and on top of that, $9,000 in healthcare, they are going to fight us till death. And so, again, it's a double-edged sword, and the side that's cutting us is a whole lot sharper these days. So, we really got to reimagine how to build a labor movement that fights for all working class Americans.
There you go.
And if I could note, Mark, what do you think about this? I mean, if the union employer is paying $3 more an hour for people's health care, sometimes it's $4 or $5 more an hour, right, for their health care, they should be invested in ensuring that that's off the table for them too, right? That way it levels the playing field, because the non-union employers, which is the vast majority of the employers, are not paying half of that, right? So I don't know,
One of our unions that supports us, the UE, has actually been trying to challenge employers at the bargaining table to join with them to support Medicare for all. They say, well, you're complaining about the healthcare costs at the bargaining table. Sign this letter of agreement that, once we get this contract negotiated, you'll join with us in efforts to lobby our representatives to fight for national healthcare coverage for all of our members. Let's take it off the table. And so I think those are the kind of innovative ideas that we've got to begin to embrace here.
I think Betty, we need to wind this down out of respect for the gracious time that Mark and Ada have brought to us. I know Carolyn, your hand is up, I think. Is that Carolyn Bowden?
Yeah, hi, Carolyn Bowden here. I just wanted to make a quick comment about the organizing tool that healthcare can be. I know when I worked for IATSE years ago as an organizer, that's actually what we used in order to get people to decide to sign a union contract and join the union, because of the trust fund that IATSE, International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, had. So that when people bounced from job to job, when they did one show this year and then another show, their healthcare would track with them. So that's how they used healthcare as an organizing tool, but that's because they had that kind of a trust fund. That's all.
By the way, IATSE is another supporter of the labor campaign for single payer, and and they do, their trust funds do great work with people who don't work for one employer. A stage hand might work on 2 or 3 different productions over the course of a year. So, and so they understand, if we had a bigger system that, no matter where you went, you had healthcare coverage, it would, be just kind of like expanding that model to everybody in the country.
All right. Well, I'm going to wind things down here. Betty, thanks for your help on the chat. Mike for running the show. Michael Lighty for doing the intro. Thank you. Thank you. And Mark and Ada. Brilliant. Maybe if is there a way that folks can reach you? If you maybe drop your contact info or something along those lines in the chat. And anybody else has resources that they want to share, like how can folks get David Loud, maybe the PSARA contact for people who want to join the ACO Reach fight. I don't know if Robbie dropped anything earlier, but just give people some resources. And then if you're in the habit of doing it, what I always do after these meetings is just save the chat. You go to the lower end of the chat, the 3 little dots, just tap it, and then it'll say save chat. Just click that. And then you'll have a harvest of all sorts of great information, contact information, websites, the Fix It Healthcare film, how you can contact us at One Pair States. I hope folks can join us this Friday for our monthly call on hospital budgeting, global budgeting with Dr. Steve Kemble. And then Saturday is our big intergenerational summit. Please join us there. And bring young folks with you. We really got to bridge these generational divides, race divides, class, geography, and so forth. We really look forward to seeing folks on Friday and Saturday, and spread the word about One Pair States. We're pushing the effort here at the state level, but we support everybody at the national level. This is our ultimate goal. That's the gold standard. We want to get to national. And right now we're tracking in a very positive way here in the Northwest, where I've relocated to Oregon, and I'll be moving to Seattle in a couple of weeks, getting closer to David Loud and company. So thank you all so much. You're all wonderful people, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday, Ada, and everybody else. Just stay in touch. Thank you so much.